Hi everyone, Sajid Amit here, and welcome to part 2 of my top-of-the-line headphone shootout. In part 1, you saw that I was comparing the Audiophile LCD5, the Abyss AB1266 5TC, the Focal Stellia, and the Focal Utopia, and I sort of graduated 2 headphones from that lot of 4 onto my final round, which is forthcoming. So that's the third and final one. This is the second one, and in which I have now in front of me the Headphone Susvara, the Sennheiser H800S, and the Stax SR007 MK1s, and the SR009S. I'll talk about why I'm including these headphones, but the way I've sort of broken up part 1 and part 2 is that part 1 had a lot of these bassy headphones that I consider very bassy, or among the best bassy headphones rather. And these headphones, and some of them do bass well, but I think they all do mid-range and treble well, right? So hence the grouping. Now, to talk a bit about inclusion and why I've included these headphones before I go on to talk about and compare each of these for comfort, aesthetics, build, tonal performance, technical performance, timbre, how I drive them and who they're for and what kind of music they play with, and finally give you a conclusion in terms of rankings of these 4. Now, the Susvara inclusion in this sort of shootout is pretty, I think, warranted. It is a wonderful headphone and a lot of people's go-to Amplify, very famous headphone. I think the inclusion of SR009S is also pretty warranted. This has been Stax's flagship for a long time. Stax has a newer flagship, the X9000, but I haven't heard it, and I suspect many people have not, because it's yet to reach the hands of many people who have ordered it. There's a big, massive backlog, I think, because of parts shortages and shipping delays and what have you. So this is still, I think, Stax's flagship that most people are acquainted with, the SR009S. Inclusion of this might raise some eyebrows, and rightly so, but this is a personal choice. I think the quality it delivers at its price is mind-blowing. I think it wipes the floor with a lot of flagship, modern-day flagships on certain parameters. So I think it merits inclusion. And finally, the 007 MK1s and not the MK2s, because I think these are better than the MK2s. Someone like Resolve, whom I respect a lot, has put the MK2s, I think, in his top 7 or top 8 in his rankings. I've heard both, and I think this is less boomy and less bloated in the bass. As a matter of fact, if you go on to Headcase and look at our Stax threads on Headphone, what you'll find is that most people who use the MK2s will mod it with blue tack to sort of lower this boominess. And others, like really respected Stax veterans like Birger, who runs Mjolnir Audio over at Headcase, you'll find that he ranks this as his #1 Stax headphone. As a matter of fact, a lot of people who own both the SR007s and 009s, especially the MK1s, I've heard will prefer this MK1 over the 009S. So that is the rationale for inclusion of all these headphones. Now, to move on to the actual discussion, which is what I hope you're here for. Starting with comfort. Funnily, all these headphones are comfortable. The Susvara is, of course, famously comfortable. The H800S is amazingly comfortable. The 007 MK1s are comfortable. It's so hard to pick or rank these headphones for comfort. I love the fact that all these headphones have this absence of clamp, and these gigantic cups, in this case of the 800S, is just so nice to have around your ears. Some people will mod the headband and add like a ZMF pilot pad or a variant thereof. The 007 is again super comfortable. I mean, it's buttery soft pads, and this self-adjusting mechanism they have on the strap. See the amount of give. It's just super comfortable, and the 009S is also super comfortable. It's difficult to rank these guys, but if I had to, I would say that I still think the Susvara is the most comfortable. So this would be 1. The 007 and the 009 would be tied for 2, and the H800S would be #4 in terms of comfort. Moving on to build quality. This is interesting. I think the build quality of all these headphones is decent, but I think the cheaper headphones actually have better build quality, because this I feel more comfortable throwing around, which you shouldn't, because these grills can actually damage if it's falls or something. I baby the Susvaras a lot. They just have this, feel that they're fragile. I mean, they're not. I mean, they've lasted people years, but I baby them more than I do other headphones, and not just because of price, because I don't think I baby the Abyss, which I have. And then I think this is of a slightly better build quality than the 009S, because the 009S has just a lot more plastic, I think. Like here and here, which is okay. But finally, if I have to rank these for build quality, I would say that the 800S is probably my number one. It's just a very sturdy modular construction, which works really well. This would be number two for build quality. And then I think I would say the Susvara and the SR009S would be tied at 3 for build quality. Aesthetics, of course, is subjective. I can't tell you which I like the most. I mean, I think this is the most eye-catching of all headphones that I own. Not all headphones that I own, but among these 4. I really like how this looks. So there's that. I like how the Susvara looks. So aesthetics, again, is very subjective. But if I had to rank them, I would say the 800S is 1, Susvara is 2. I really like this sort of champagne and gold, brown and gold sort of, combination. So this would be my number 3 in terms of aesthetics. And then the 009S would come in at number 4. Now, to talk about sound, starting with, I guess, technical performance. Because, yeah, I mean, technical performance matters a lot, right? So all these headphones are technically very adept. But if I had to break it down and talk about detail retrieval, I think this is by far the most resolving headphone. Yeah, the Susvara is close. The Susvara gives the Stax run for its money when it comes to mid-range, but all through the frequency response, when you talk about treble detail especially, and even bass detail, I mean, this is as resolving gets. Susvara comes close, and I think, trades blows, especially for mid-range. But yeah, I think my number one headphone for detail retrieval here would be the SR009S, followed by the Susvara, and then the HD100S, and then the Stax Mark Ones. This might be controversial, but that's how I hear it. Because some people might actually say the HD100S is not as resolving as the Mark 1, especially a lot of Stax aficionados. I've heard people say that this is as resolving as Susvara. It's not. Number 4 is where it's at in terms of resolution. Soundstage wise, the cheapest headphone I think just knocks the ball out of the park in terms of soundstage. This has the widest soundstage. It's a very clean soundstage. This disappears in a way that no other headphone does. I think because of the soundstage and space around images. So even for imaging, I think this has massive imaging chops. It doesn't have a very deep soundstage, but it has a strong center of image. It has very well dispersed and distinct images with wonderful air around images. And I love it for soundstage and imaging. So for soundstage, it's definitely better than anything I have here. I would say the HD100S is 1. I would say the 009S and the Susvaras are tied at 2. Because while this is slightly wider, I think this has deeper stage and more holographic. And the 007s are, in my mind, not as necessarily great as soundstage. They're pretty intimate sounding, which has its use case and its fans. So imaging wise, again, they're all pretty close. I do think that the 800S is extremely good for imaging, but if I had to pick a number 1 for imaging, it would be the 009S. I would sort of tie the Susvara and the 800S at 2 for imaging, and then the 007s would come in at 4. Speed, dynamics. In terms of speed and dynamics, they're all pretty fast headphones. The slowest, I think, it's not a slow headphone at all, but relatively speaking, it is the HD100S. It's a pretty nice sounding headphone in terms of speed and transient response as well. But it would be my number 4. My number 3 in terms of speed would be the Stax Mark 1s. The Susvaras are faster than the Stax Mark 1s. So this would be number 2 in terms of speed, right? And the fastest headphone I have on the table here is the 009S. It's blazing fast. Not natural sounding, but fast and sounds superb. Like if you're listening to a lead solo, a lead guitarist of a heavy metal or rock band going nuts with the lead guitar, the Stax 009S sounds magnificent. But what that means is, like, let's say for bass instruments or bass heavy instruments like drums, the decay can be a bit fast. which gives it this sort of adds to the ESTAT timbre, which I'll talk about later. Dynamics wise, this is a pretty dynamic headphone. This slams hard. This is very crunchy. This has what people call macro dynamics, lots of it. And this is a fairly dynamic headphone. If I had to pick one, I would sort of give it to the Susvaras when amped right and driven by the right chain behind it, but this is pretty close in terms of dynamics. The other headphones are not very dynamic, but I would say that the H800S is more dynamic than the 009S. But if you're looking for dynamic headphones, I think the part one of this video is where I discuss the dynamic headphones in my collection, and I think among the more dynamic headphones in the market. So check the part one out. I'll drop the link to this in the description. Now, to talk about timbre. So, I mean, I'm gonna play it safe here, not because I want to, but because not because I need to, but because I want to. In terms of timbre, how I perceive timbral accuracy, I think the 800S is the most timbrally accurate headphone among all these four. It is very sweet and natural sounding in terms of timbre. I just love the timbre of this headphone. It's one of the reasons why I still own it, one of the reasons why I've never thought about selling it. Timbrally speaking, the Susvara, I've often said, is among the best out there, and it is. And I think it's very close to the H800S, but I think it falls just a bit short. And yeah, but having said that, for vocals and acoustic guitar, strings, the timbre of the Susvaras is legendary. The Stax headphones don't have a great timbre. They have a very distinct ESTAT timbre, which might not be for everyone. And I'm pretty sure a lot of people don't like Stats. I have come around to Stats to the point that I love them. I would never consider selling the 009S, for example. But yeah, I mean, timbrally, they're magnificent. If you like the ESTAT timbre, it's a distinct timbre. It is not natural sounding. So people who like the ESTAT timbre are those that like it's very delicate, delicious sort of presentation, not because of its naturalness. All that being said, ranking these headphones for timbral accuracy or naturalness, I would say the H800S just beats the Susvara's 2, and the 009S and the 007s are tied for the third position. Yeah. Tonality wise, to go by reference curves and that sort of deal, because they're debatable, I've debated about them, and our tastes should not be dictated by a curve that adheres to the preference of 64% of a sample. I feel like a lot of people who bandy about the graphs, not respect reviewers who understand graphs and know how to use them, but a lot of general audiophiles don't understand that the graph comes out of a survey which is done on a sample of a population, and there are lots of ways in which you can question the size of the sample, the accuracy of the sample, whether the sample was indicative of demographic variations globally and whatnot. But all that aside, the graph is a nice one, because if you hear the graph, by that I mean if you hear headphones which graph like the Harman 2018 or other iterations of Harman, they are nice sounding headphones. The AG600, the AG650, the Sundara, the Susvara, the HE1 even, all have some resemblance to the Harman, and I think they all sound nice, so there's something there. The Utopia even. So with that out of the way, I'm not going to be talking about my favorite headphones in terms of tonality because of Harman, but because of how I perceive and hear. I think, tonally speaking, this is the best headphone I have on my table right now. It's a pretty reference class headphone. The tonality here I've described in great length in a separate review of the Susvaras. But just to sort of very quickly recap, I think it's got decent bass, best in class mid-range. It's not shouty, it's not recessed, it's just perfect. And the most amazing air frequencies ever. It's just wonderful. This energy even above 20K is just amazing. So I love what Susvara does. I do wish it had a bit more bass, but it's subjective. A lot of people will not wish more bass on the Susvaras. The second best headphone in terms of tonal performance that I have here is the Sennheiser H800S. I also find this somewhat neutral. People have claimed it's bright. I don't think the top end is bright. I find it pretty reference and neutral. Again, this could use more bass. This has more bass than the previous version, which was the original 800. And I love the tonality here, but I prefer the Susvara's a bit more. Of the two Stax headphones, I think, I want to talk about how they are different. So this has a tonality that is warmer, lusher, richer, more mid-bass. And this has some treble sparkle, but not as much as here. This is airy though. So this is for someone who likes an LCD4 kind of sound, a warm signature with some air frequencies, with some sparkle, and it's lovely. However, if we're talking about this guy here, this is the best in class for treble. Like, this does treble in such an interesting way. And this sort of gives the lie, I think, to frequency responses, because if you look at the frequency response of this headphone, it's so jaggedy, it's so uneven that you might feel like it's the wonkiest thing. And in some ways it is, but it still comes together in such a cohesive and brilliant way. It's lively, it's airy, it's sparkly, the mid-range is wonderful, it's very nuanced, there's a lot of microdynamics. Overall, I just think, like, if I had to pick a headphone among the Stax headphones for tonality, I would pick this. So that's it, guys. Now, who are these headphones for? And what do they play well with? And how do I drive them? And how should you drive them? So Susvara, I drive with a speaker amp. I always have. Well, not always. Interestingly, I've even used a topping A90 to drive a Susvara. The A90, I've come to the conclusion, is a terrible amp, unless you're driving an Aria or a Susvara. Like in the morning today, I was driving my Utopia with the A90 and it just was terrible. For whatever reason, I feel like dynamic drivers go to die on this amp, but planars do well. It does have higher current than average, so that's there, and planars do respond well to current. But I drive the Susvara off a speaker amp. The speaker amps I've tried and liked with the Susvaras, if you want a warmer sound signature, you'd pick a Hagel. Hagel makes it not just warm, but Hagel gives it a punch in the bass frequency, so that's worth keeping in mind. I've tried it with the Past Labs, which doesn't give it that sort of bass punch, but it's a warm, soft sound. Susvaras are soft to start with, so you might not want to pair it with the Past Labs. Of the Accuphase, it sounds great. I have an Accuphase E380 speaker amp, a pretty nice premium speaker amp, which I have. With the Susvaras, it sounds magnificent. The Accuphase is very neutral, dynamic, punchy, while being sweetly voiced. So it works well. Interestingly, Susvara actually means sweetly voiced, which I think is pretty cool because it is sweetly voiced. In Sanskrit is the language, right? Susvara. Headphone has all these Sanskrit words for all their headphones, which I think is pretty cool. But in any case, so this requires a speaker amp. I think the Core Dave is a better DAC to pair this with than the Holo Audio May. But that is going to be subjective because the May accentuates its tonal richness and accuracy and laid-backness. The Dave with a speaker amp with it that's also dynamic but also is sweetly voiced gives Susvara, I think, maximum sort of, help. The 800S is not as difficult to drive as Susvara. People like it with tube amps, and I love tube amps with the HD800S. Not in general though. I'm not a big fan of tubes, but with the HD800S, tubes do sound very nice. And this sounds very nice with tubes. I like it off solid state as well. I like it off my DAB, the Khan Alpha, and the SP2000NT with the HD800S. So it's pretty easy to drive. I don't think this is as amp picky as people have made it out to be. A lot of the newer amps, I think, play well with the HD800S. Now for the Stax. These are some chain picky headphones. They'll sound very different of different setups. They'll sound very different of different DACs. The thing with Stax is that they have a way of magnifying and amplifying the characteristics of the chain behind it. So with these, you can do this sort of micro level inspection of your DAC in terms of what your DAC actually sounds like, of your amplifier, a Stax amp, of course. So I'll give you an example. So when I was A/Bing between the Core Dave and the Holo May and some Denafrip Stax with these Stax headphones, the difference between the presentation of the May versus the Dave was almost night and day. When going back to my TC, for example, which is also a pretty revealing headphone, the differences were not as stark. So Stax, in a sense, are like speakers. They really magnify differences in your amps among your DACs. Some people see even with interconnects and power cords, which I'm not going to get into, but with DACs, I've tested and I can vouch that Stax headphones are super amp picky. This requires a warm amp. R2R is the way to go with the 009S. I love the May with this. The May is very holographic. So what happens with the 009S is that the May has a very deep stage And with the 009S, it becomes even deeper. So the vocalist and the entire performance is very far from you. This does not happen with, let's say, a different DAC like the Aries 2, which is a lower price DAC, but a wonderful tenor fib stack. This happens much less with the Chord Dave, but the Chord Dave becomes very bright with this and brittle sounding, which I don't like at all. The Chord Dave is great with the Susvaras though, like I said. And finally, this is a warm, intimate headphone, and I think it does take well to a neutral sounding DAC. The Dave makes it bright despite the fact that it's warm, because the Dave somehow accentuates its treble frequencies, or rather, the Stax 007, like the 009, accentuates what the Dave does, which is a clinical sort of presentation. So yeah, in terms of DACs I've tried, I still prefer this with the Hollow May. And the amp that I drive both these Stax headphones with is the Kevin Gilmore KG SSHV Carbon, made by Miroslav in Sweden. He goes by Duque on Headphone. He's wonderful to deal with, a polite person, makes very nice amps. So the Carbon is a warm, powerful amp, which is important because then this is not bright, and this is not bright either, especially when both these headphones are run off the Hollow Audio May. So that's what I drive them with. Who they're for, this I think works well with all genres, perhaps least with classic rock and heavy metal. It's not a very heavy metal friendly headphone. This works again with all genres and pretty much similar genres as the Susvara. And the 009S I think works particularly well with natural acoustic type of music with guitars. Eric Clapton is magical on this, Nora Jones, jazz artists you can think of. I've also talked about how the 009S also does really well with electric guitar because of its speed and its treble and this great mid-range microdynamics. Sounds great. This again is an all-rounder headphone. It works well with all genres. I think modern, classical, name it, it does work wonderfully well. The 007, however, doesn't have the widest stage, so that is worth keeping in mind. If you like grandiose soundtracks, I don't think the 007, while it does perform, I don't think you get the best performance. This works better with soundtracks and orchestral music in a way that no other headphones can or do. Yeah, so that's it really. And just to give you my final thoughts on how I rank these two headphones, I think the best headphone I have here is the Headphone Susvara and the SR009S. So these will progress to my final round. These headphones are wonderful, and these are the two best headphones I have. I don't think I'll ever sell these headphones, so there's that. And in terms of my number 3 and number 4, difficult one, I would tie these honestly for positions 3 and 4. So these would be tied at 3, honestly. I can't pick one over the other, so that's where I'm at. So Susvara and the 009S are the best headphones in this shootout, so they will graduate or advance to the final round where I pit the LCD5, the Bass TC, the Susvara, and the 009S. Stay tuned for that one. I'm sure it'll be fun, for me at least, and I definitely hope it's fun for you and useful if you're planning on buying any of these headphones. So that's it. Thank you so much for watching. I do these reviews just for fun, honestly. I'm not necessarily looking to, make money from these videos. It's just fun generating content that I think engages people in discussion, which is a huge part of the hobby for me. And I really hope this was useful. If this was, subscribe, give my video a like, and I'll see you in my next one.